Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our session 3 of the small acreage seminars. With us today, we have the viticulture specialist, Michael Cook, who has graciously agreed to be our presenter today. For a little housekeeping, we would ask that everybody stays muted at this point in time, as well as keeping your video off. It just helps with the bandwidth on things. Also, if you've got any questions, please go ahead, feel free, put those in the chat box, and I will relay those to Michael as we go through the presentation. And at the end of the session, we can open it up for questions at that point in time. So with that being said, Michael, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Now, Jacqueline, can you see my screen with the PowerPoint?
I can.
Okay, great. All right. Well, howdy, everyone. Thank you to Jacqueline for inviting me to her program here. And I don't know if this is your first time or if you've been through all three series yet, but hopefully this will be one of your favorite ones. And let's see. Erica's having trouble hearing. Erica, you may have to log out and log back in to see. This is being recorded again, Jacqueline mentioned, so if you're having issues, we will have this in full posted later, or if you want to go back and look at it, or if you've got friends you want to share it with. So again, Jacqueline and I work together. We both work for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and she approached me and gave me an invitation and said, hey, here's what we're looking for. Our wine industry is growing. Our backyard vineyard, interest in growing grapes in the backyard is growing, and we've got some homeowners and small acreage owners, maybe some large acreage owners who may be looking at diversifying what they've got in the garden, or even looking at starting a small scale operation for many reasons, maybe even ag exemption. And so my job today is just to provide you with the most up-to-date research-based information for the possibility of growing grapes under all of those examples I just mentioned, whether it's one in the backyard on an arbor or 10,000 in a vineyard setting commercially. And so obviously we could talk for hours about this, but I'm going to highlight some of the things that you need to know if you're going to start this adventure. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Again, if there's any questions, put it in the chat first, or say, hey, I have a question in the chat box, and then Jacqueline will relay that to me, because once I get talking, I get in my zone, and so I don't see the chat box right now. And then if we have questions, we can unmute ourselves. This is very informal, but I'm excited to be here today. So we'll get started. So a little bit about me. I am the viticulturist for AgriLife Extension for North and Northeast Texas. So we all know Texas is a big state, and if you've ever gardened before, we may have some California transplants, but in Texas, there's lots of different growing regions. It's not all the same, and if you've driven from Dallas to El Paso, it's like a different world. And so the recommendations that we have for growing any type of horticulture crop will be quite different because of the difference in soils, climate, chilling hours, disease pressure, water availability, the list goes on and on. And so we can split Texas into 4 grape growing regions. And we have extension viticulturists whose job it is to take research-based information from the university and bring it to you, the prospective grape grower. Again, whether you're a hobbyist or you want to go commercial, if you're a winemaker, that kind of thing. So anyways, it's our job to provide that research-based information. And Texas A&M is the land-grant university, and we have the extension service housed out of the A&M system. And so again, we are the only research-based option as far as that goes with extension. So it's exciting to be able to share this information and being tasked with that responsibility. So if you can hear my voice, you may automatically go, this guy's not from deep South Texas. His voice pitch is a little higher. And that's because I'm from Dallas, so I'm a North Texan. Some Texans would call me a Yankee, and I don't take too kindly to that. But my territory that I work with, both backyard vineyards, master gardeners, the general public, and our commercial grape growers and winemakers, is in the green. And I am assuming most of y'all are from the Metroplex, Tarrant County, maybe Dallas County. And so what we're going to talk about today is specific to our region. And so that's great. So we have a lot of research-based information to provide. There's a lot of exciting things we can talk about. And again, I'm not here to tell you to grow grapes or not. You may be totally put off at the end of this talk and go, I was thinking about growing grapes, but now I know for sure I don't want to do this. And that brings me a smile just as much as someone who wants to grow grapes, because I've done my job in providing that information to you so you can make that decision and hopefully save some money if this wasn't for you. So, and also I'm going to talk a little bit about our history, what the current status is of our wine industry, and not just in Texas, but the US. And then we'll talk about the potential for selecting the right variety. Sorry, I'm in an office building and there's some loud noises going on. Someone just peeled out. Anyway, sorry about that. Where was I? We'll be talking about some variety recommendations, how you would establish a vineyard, the nuts and bolts of that, some resources, and then even some economics. And if you're interested in 1D1 ag exemption, how does a vineyard fit into that? And that's dependent on county, but I can give you some general info. And again, I'm here to entertain any questions, no matter what you've got. So I am from Dallas. I studied horticulture at Texas A&M, and I had the opportunity to receive a full fellowship to Fresno State in the San Joaquin Valley of California, which is where most of our fruits and vegetables come from. If you've ever visited Fresno or Bakersfield, it's incredible. All our almonds come from there, most of our table grapes, almost all of our raisins, tomatoes, walnuts, pistachios. It's just incredible. Garlic. The list goes on. And I worked with a little company called Charles Shaw, Two Buck Chuck. Well, it was actually Bronco Wine Company, but the vineyard I was working on was 4,000 acres, which is about the entire acreage for our state. And we worked on a number of things there. So I started this position in 2016, and I can't believe how time's flying already, but I'm back home and I got back as quick as I could. So that's a little bit about me. Again, if you know someone, a good friend who says, hey, I want to grow some grapes in the backyard, but I'm not in North Texas, maybe you're in Austin or Houston or Lubbock, we have a full extension team that can work with you. And if you're interested in winemaking, we have a enologist. So the first thing I really want to define as we learn more about grapes and wine is the difference between this word I threw out called viticulture and this word enology. So viticulture is a subset of horticulture, so high value crops, fruits, vegetables, nuts, ornamentals, flowers, that kind of thing. And viticulture is the study of growing grapes. So I'm a viticulturist, so my bread and butter is actually the ag side, the farming side. And enology is the study of making wine. And so I have a little knowledge in that, but we have a full-blown enologist with extension. And I do offer a number of backyard winemaking classes, but we have a commercial enologist on staff as well. So it's pretty exciting. You go, oh my gosh, well, how the heck does A&M have viticulture and enology specialists for the state? Well, the reason we have that is because our industry is growing so fast and there's such a demand, both on a homeowner scale and a commercial scale, for that research-based information. So let's kind of get into the foundation of grape growing and little history here. But the first thing you may be thinking is, hey, I'm curious about growing grapes. Maybe you just want to learn a little more about our wine industry. That's okay. But when we look at Texas, we can ask ourselves, what can we do with grapes? Grapes are multi-use, but there are specific uses for certain varieties. Some varieties of grapes are bred specifically for raisin production. Some varieties of grapes are specifically for table use or fresh eating. Some grapes are specifically bred for wine making. But no matter which grape there is, you could also eat them fresh or make jelly or juice them, but they may not have the best characteristics for that. But when we look at Texas, there's a lot of different uses for grapes depending on the variety we select. We can make juice and flavoring agents and baking and other food groups like ice cream and smoothies, whatever. We can make jelly. We can make raisins. I always like to joke, we make plenty of raisins here in North Texas, but it's not because we wanted to. It's because of disease. And then we can eat grapes fresh. And the number one use for Texas is wine. So I would say 99.9% of all commercial vineyards, those varieties of grapes are for wine production. And that is the number one use for those grapes across the entire state. There's one other thing that we often forget about, and this is especially true if you're a homeowner or you're a small scale operation and you're in agritourism, so you may host weddings or events, and that's the aesthetic value that a vineyard or even one grapevine can provide. And a lot of people don't have a lot of space in the Metroplex, and they say, well, I've got some vegetables and I've got some flowers and I've got my landscape and I've got a peach tree in the corner of this side of the backyard, but I've got an arbor, maybe you have a fence line or another corner in the yard, and grapes could be a great addition to that. So there's this concept that's really becoming popular in homeowner, what's the word I'm looking for? Homeowner groups, where we have this concept of edible landscaping. So putting edibles into your landscape and providing fruit, but also that beauty, that aesthetic. So we can use grapes for many purposes. Again, the main focus I'll be talking about is actually, it'll be split into two. We have a number of grapes that are specific for fresh eating or jelly, and then also wine. So we'll kind of highlight those. Now, I love history. One of the reasons I became interested in viticulture and learning more about grapes and wine is just the culture and the history associated with this crop and the byproducts of that crop. And I had no idea before I started in 2016 that Texas had a grape history. It's actually a grape history. Texas has a lot of interesting historical facts about growing grapes. I'm not going to bore you too much. I could speak for an hour just on the history, but let's take maybe 5 minutes. And the first thing is there are grapes that have called Texas home for thousands of years. And those would be our native grapes. And Texas is home to the largest repository of wild grape species in the nation. Anytime we can, promote Texas, we're all proud Texans. Anytime we can say, hey, we're number one in this, or we're the top in this, I'm always going to showcase that. And so right off the bat, Texas is home to more wild grapes than anywhere else in the nation. We have around 13 species. So maybe you grew up in East Texas on your grandparents' farm, you go visit there on the weekends or something, and you swing on those old grapevines in the woods, or maybe you've got property right now, and down where the creek is, you see a grapevine growing up a native pecan tree. Most of the native grapes that we're going to see here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex would be this grape right here, Vitis mustangensis, or the muscadine vine. And has anyone ever had fruit from a muscadine? You can put that in the chat. If you have, you would probably be unpleasantly surprised because that fruit is about marble size and it turns dark purple, and you pop that right in your mouth, and though it looks ripe, and it is ripe, it is extremely sour. And so Mustang has a very high acid content relative to other grape species. Anywho, we have a number of grape species. I'm in Denton County, so I didn't mention this, but I'm based out of the Denton AgriLife office, but I have a 55 county territory. I have a few native grape species. And so we have a lot of grapes that have been growing successfully here, but it didn't take long to figure out that there were a number of others that just did not thrive. And I'll talk about that in a second. We didn't see the first vineyards actually being planted. The Native Americans certainly would have utilized grapes as a food source, as a treat, as acidic as they may have been, but they didn't start planting grapes in mass. And there's two reasons for that. First reason is most Native Americans were nomadic in nature, and so they couldn't take the vines with them or make wine. And they also had other mind-altering drugs at their disposal. And so wine was not something they were interested in. They had peyote and they had tobacco. So there was an interest as far as a food source, but not as a wine source. We didn't see vineyards actually being planted until the 1650s with the introduction of the Franciscan missionaries spreading Christianity throughout Texas, along with the Spanish government, whose their main focus was finding silver and gold, which they did not find in Texas. So the imprint of the Spanish government was quite small compared to the lasting effects of the Franciscans. And of course, these vineyards were planted primarily for what? No, it wasn't having a glass of wine with a cheese plate on the back patio. It was for sacramental use. Okay. We didn't see vineyards being planted for secular use until the 1800s. And that was when there were three primary groups immigrating from Europe. Does anyone know who those would have been? I'll let y'all put it in the chat if you want to, and I'll pop that up. Any ideas which three immigrant groups were coming from Europe that had a very long and rich history of grapes and wine? Any ideas? Well, the first would have been the Italians, and then the French, and then the Germans. And they all planted grapes. All these grapes were from their motherland, and they were not native. So they weren't used to Texas soil. They weren't used to the heat. They weren't used to our disease and pest pressure. And unfortunately, there were zero reports of production, primarily from the Germans who founded Fredericksburg and New Braunfels and Belleville. And so a lot of these immigrants were being forced to try to make wine from these wild grapes. Again, the wild grapes, they're tough as nails. They'll grow, they're native, they're adapted, but the fruit quality was lacking. And fast forward to the late 1800s, and this gentleman comes on the scene. And this guy right here is a famous man. You may not recognize this portrait. I didn't know anything about him until I started working for Extension. His name is Thomas Volney Munson. Now, he's from Illinois, but as everyone says, as the saying goes, he got to Texas as quick as he could. And he moved to Denison, Texas. If you don't know where that is, that's just north of Dallas on the Red River. And he didn't drink wine, but he was interested in growing grapes. And this gentleman went all across the United States on horseback and started taking notes on all the wild grapes that we had. And he noticed they grew really well. They were low maintenance, but the quality of the fruit was lacking. And so this gentleman was our first viticulturist, really, for the U.S. He wrote a couple books and blah, 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 did a lot of different things. He named a lot of grapes, but his main contribution was he bred over 300 new grapes that were adapted to our conditions here in North Texas and other parts of the states, South Texas, the deep South rather. But the fruit quality is much better. And believe it or not, once we get into the grape varieties, 2 of those we actually recommend to this day. So this man also was famous for saving the French wine industry from complete annihilation. I don't have time to talk about that today with you, but we have a great past. And a lot of people have tried for many, many years to grow grapes. And now, thanks to better varieties, better pesticide options, and better viticulture practices, we're able to grow some of these grapes that the Germans and the Italians and the French failed at early on. But the history's there. So we have a number of wild grapes. Again, the Mustang is right here. If you're from East Texas, you may be familiar with a different type of grape called Vitis rotundifolia, or now Muscadinia rotundifolia, as it's been changed. That's the muscadine. So a lot of people go, oh yeah, I've got muscadine growing wild in my backyard in Fort Worth. Well, most likely you don't. So the first thing as far as natives go is Mustang grapes, totally different than muscadine. If you're from East Texas, you probably have muscadine growing there. And muscadine are very unique. They're very thick-skinned, they're seeded, and they have a very, very, I like to call it a candy-like aroma and flavor, very unique. So most of us are not going to be growing muscadines. They're the only grape variety that has a true soil pH requirement. They need acidic soil, and most of our soils in the Metroplex are not acidic. Okay, just as a testament to some of these grapes, I know the first thing you're drawn to is my beautiful physique, my nice belly hanging out there, but take a look at that grapevine. That is not a tree, guys. That is a grapevine. And that is a grapevine in North Texas. That's at Fort Belknap in Graham, about an hour and a half from Fort Worth. And in my opinion, this is the largest and probably the oldest living grapevine in Texas. It is a Mustang grape. And so here's the picture of the foliage. It has two leaf forms. You may see this on your property, or if you walk down parks on the Trinity, that kind of thing, you'll probably see Mustang. But this just goes to show you, this vine is from the 1930s. It was planted on Fort Belknap. There's a number of others, and it received no care, and it has grown to over 6 to 7 feet in circumference. So again, I'm trying to paint a theme here that there are some grapes that do very well here, but there are others that don't. And so we're going to kind of wade through that in a little bit. But wrapping up kind of the story time as it is, as it may be, or what's the word I'm looking for? That's not what I meant to say. Before we move into the actual science of growing grapes, we're going to talk about what does our wine industry look like. Now, remember, we have a number of people who don't drink wine, and they grow grapes in their backyard or maybe small scale for farmers markets for fresh eating or jelly. Maybe you make raisins. That's okay. That's great. No problem. Maybe just for the aesthetic value. But as far as commercially, remember, wine is what is number one. And so is our wine industry growing? Grapes are the most valuable horticulture crop in the United States. They're also the most intense to manage. And so maybe you went to Tuscany and you saw all these beautiful vineyards, or you went to Napa and, you know, it's romantic, it's beautiful, everything's well kept. Let me tell you something, that didn't just happen by happenstance. We're growing vines, and what do vines do? They like to grow. And so vines grow up trees or support structures reaching for the sun. So they're always growing. They're always putting out new growth. And if you ever go by a vineyard that's well manicured, it took a lot of work to keep that vine that wants to grow 80 foot up a tree within a 6 to 7 foot area and keep it trimmed. So that's where the intensive part comes in. Grapes are very high maintenance. Even our low maintenance grapes can be fairly high maintenance compared to other fruit crops. But the reward can be very sweet. Okay, just to give you some perspective, we have around 8,000 acres of grapes in Texas. That makes us number 5 in the United States. Just to give you some more perspective, California has over 500,000 acres. So we pale in comparison to California, but we're still number 5. And that's a respectable number, and it continues to grow. We have about 750 to 1,000 acres in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. In East Texas, we have about 60 acres of muscadine. Again, those are mainly used for wine or fresh eating. You'll see muscadines in clamshells offered at like Brookshire's in East Texas and all throughout the Deep South. Now, here's where it gets really exciting as far as our growth. We have a lot of wineries popping up. Long gone are the days where you would say, there's not a good winery near me. The quality of wine from our wineries, the quantity of wineries has greatly improved and greatly expanded its reach. And so in 2014, we had about 300 wineries across the state. Now, I'm an Aggie, so I'll let you do the math. But now, today in 2022, we have around anywhere from 700 to 900. The permits that we have are 900, but some wineries have more than one permit because they have multiple locations. But just think of it, we've tripled the number of permitted wineries in the state in less than a decade, right? So that's really exciting to see the growth. Because of that, we're still number 5 as far as how much wine we make, the number of gallons, but we have now moved to number 3 as far as number of wineries in the United States. So we've kicked out New York State and Oregon. We are now number 3 as of 2021. That is a huge deal. Okay, so that's really exciting. Texas wine is part of a $13 billion boost to the Texas economy when you factor in tourism, right? Wine tourism. And so we're a big business. You may be familiar with Fredericksburg. The Texas Hill Country, believe it or not, is the number 2 wine destination in the United States, right behind Napa Sonoma, as far as wine tourism goes. I want to say there's over 2 million wine visitors in our wine industry, out of our wine tasting rooms every year. And that makes the Hill Country in particular number 2. So I forget where we rank across the board, but the Hill Country is number 2, but Dallas, Fort Worth are almost as many wineries as Hill Country. We're just spread out more. Okay, what are the qualities, or what is the current status of the American wine consumer? What is the data there? What's going on with our wine consumers across the nation? Well, just to give you a little information as far as 2018, so things have been updated a little bit, but probably haven't changed too much since then. That about 40% of all American adults drink wine. And it's almost even. Women do drink more wine than men, or, well, I should say, not quantity, but about, going blank here, how do you say this? It's not difficult, but there are more wine drinkers are women than men. That's what I want to say. And so, but not by much, by quite a slim margin. Frequency, about 33% of Americans drink wine more than once a week. I drink, a glass every couple weeks to a month, but there are people who drink much more frequently than that. But what's really interesting is the demographics and by generation, the demographic and data by generation. And most people would say, well, it's the baby boomers that are drinking the most wine, but actually now the millennials are taking over. And you may be noticing some changes at your local winery to market towards the millennials. And so millennials are much less afraid to try new and exotic things. So they're more willing to try stuff that's not Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Chardonnay. And they're also drawn to labels and, artistic designs and things like that. And so they also are very interested in the local movement, and they want to know, what's the story? Who grew this? I don't know anything about grapes or wine, but I want to know who grew it and what's special about it, and what's it supposed to taste like, and what do I, how do I experiment with this, or that kind of thing. So things are changing. But let's now start focusing on the science of growing grapes. Again, maybe you're considering growing one grapevine in the backyard, or maybe you want to, grow whatever's required for ag exemption. Or maybe you're interested in putting in a small vineyard to make your own wine, or even sell and have a tasting room or winery. And so we'll kind of touch on all of those in the next few slides. But before we start looking at making wine or any of that kind of business, we first need to focus on the grapes. And we're gonna work our way through the viticulture for North Texas. So the question is that we would first ask is it easy growing grapes, or what grapes are going to be low maintenance versus high maintenance, and what's involved? I mean, what does it take to grow a high maintenance grape versus a low maintenance grape in North Texas, and how do I be successful? Well, there are a number of challenges that are inherent to Texas as a whole, and many of those are also also true for North Texas. Let's just say that. I'm having trouble with my vocabulary today. The number one limiting factor for growing grapes in Texas is Pierce's disease. All right, that's the number one issue. And if you're considering growing a grapevine in the backyard, this is something that you need to address. Number one, that's the first thing. And let me actually show you, because this is going to be helpful to you if you decide to grow grapes, or if this is what makes you not want to grow grapes, is looking into this specifically. We don't have a ton of time to talk about Pierce's disease. I'll give you some highlights, but let me just show you. If you go to our website, you can either go to Aggie Horticulture, which has a lot of info on everything horticulture for the state of Texas, or you can type in, actually, yeah, if you go to aggiehorticulture.tamu.edu, let me show you how to get there. Let's just Google Aggie Horticulture. Okay, I don't know if you can see my screen now, but you should be able to. If we go to the fruit and nut resource, no, they've changed it. So you have a lot of resources if you want to grow fruits or nuts in your backyard, vegetables, earth-kind landscaping, and here's viticulture and enology. If you go to that tab, you'll note a bunch of free resources for you in the form of fact sheets, okay, and also books. And one of the important books that is available for free is the Pierce's Disease Management Guide. You can download this for free. It's a little dated, but it's still very applicable. And this will give you a lot more information on Pierce's disease. Okay, I'm going to give you the nuts and bolts. One other thing I'll send Jacqueline is a free copy. We just published this last year, and it's called Starting a Vineyard in Texas. It is a quick Cliff Note guide to doing this. Okay, so you'll have that resource as well. Okay, but anyways, a lot of free information online that supplements this talk. Okay, so let's get back. So Pierce's disease is number one. Number two, we are located in an area that receives rainfall. Now, when do we receive rainfall? Well, who the hell knows, right? We are supposed to get 30 inches or so, 35 inches on average every year, but that's not always the case. And usually what happens is Mother Nature can be pretty cruel to us in North Texas, because we may get 35 inches of rain a year, but we'll get it in 3 rain events, right? We'll get one in the winter, one in the spring, and one in the summer, and they'll all be 10 inches. And then we won't get rain any other time. Or we'll get an inch here for a whole week straight or 2 weeks straight. So it's really inconsistent. And grapes like consistent weather, and we don't get that. Because of the moisture that we receive, and because it falls during the growing season when we have green leaves and fruit, we have a plethora of insects and other pests, as well as diseases like bacteria, bacterial pathogens, fungal pathogens, viral pathogens, nematodes on sandy soil. We've got a lot that want to attack our grapes. We also have animals like deer and hogs and raccoons and squirrels and birds. So lots of different things want to go and feast on our grape leaves and fruit. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. Okay, the top challenges that we face in North Texas will also include spring frost. And so you may be familiar with this challenge if you grow tomatoes or any other fruit or vegetable crop. Texas, unfortunately, we are blessed to have a long growing season, but a lot of things wake up early in the season, and our spring frost risk typically doesn't resolve until mid-March. But over the last few years, we've seen a spring frost as late as mid-April, which is very, very problematic. And that is also very challenging for Texas vineyards, because you have a grapevine, let's say you have one in your backyard, and it will wake up in spring. Now, when it's asleep, when it's dormant in winter, it's very well protected, most times, against cold temperatures. But as soon as the grapevine wakes up and pushes out new green succulent growth, and we get a cold snap, that green growth is susceptible to temperatures 32 or below. And here's an example of a vineyard that's been pruned down to a spur, and the buds have pushed and there were green shoots and they got zapped. Now, the problem is that our fruit is held on that first shoot. So the mother vine's smart. She'll put out another shoot in the same spot up to 3 times, but there's usually not fruit on those new replacement shoots. And so what it boils down to is if we grow a variety that is in a frost pocket or an early budding variety and it gets frozen back, you'll see new green growth, but you'll lose your crop for the year. And this is a big problem, all right? There are some things we can do, and we'll talk about that later. I alluded to that just now. Again, rain. When do we get rain? Yeah, it's very inconsistent. And so rain is important because grapevines need water, but we don't get it consistently enough, so we will have to supplementally irrigate. So we need to make sure that if we're irrigating from our faucet or a well or a pond, that we have enough water to supplement throughout the year, especially in the summer, but also that our quality is good. Unfortunately, many of our wells in the Metroplex are very salty. Now, you and I may not taste saltiness, but certain plants, especially grapes, blueberries, strawberries, are very salt sensitive. And so we have to make sure that if we're doing this on a larger scale, that our water is very clean. Rainwater is great, but you need a lot of water for grapevines on a yearly or annual basis. Grapes need about 24 inches of rain, or I should say water, a year, and we get that if we were to get it consistently. Again, we will typically have to supplementally irrigate. So that could be as simple as you pulling a hose on your one grapevine and watering it, or installing a drip system. That's what we use commercially, is drip irrigation. Okay. Rain, if we get a lot of rain, we lose that variable to control. Rain can be problematic. It's not always a blessing. It's great when we're dry and we get rain, but rain can remove oxygen from the soil. And if the soil doesn't drain well and it's very wet, our grapevines may die from waterlogging. On the other hand, rain also spurs disease, especially fungal disease. You may have experienced that with your tomatoes or roses, or other plants in your landscape. And rain also encourages a lot of growth. And so if you've ever been to Napa or cool climate area, which is not Napa, but let's say Northern California or Canada or the parts of upstate New York, you may see vines that are half the size as ours. And that's because they don't have the warmth, which we have, but rain and nitrogen are what spur growth. So we typically in North Texas will have vines that get very big, and that requires a lot of hand work to keep those trimmed up and nice and disease free. Okay, so that falls into vigor. Then variety. What the heck am I going to grow that I like and that's going to make me money, possibly, if you're going at this in a business sense, and what's the lowest maintenance possible. No one wants to spray pesticides. It costs money at minimum, right? Whether it may have environmental implications, but we have to do it in many cases, whether it's organic or conventional, because we're trying to grow something that's not adapted or not well adapted. And so just like a lot of our other horticulture crops that are not native to Texas, we may have to spray them for insects or fungus or other things. Okay. Well, there are some varieties that are lower maintenance that are more disease tolerant, and we'll talk about those later. We have hail, wind, tornadoes. There are a lot of things Mother Nature can throw our way. And then another issue is labor. If you're going to grow more than a couple grapes, and you want to sell some fresh grapes at the farmer's market, or maybe you want to sell grapes to a winery, or maybe make wine yourself, who's going to run this? And we'll go through some of those requirements later. Where are you going to get your supplies? And then education. And that's where Jacqueline and I come in as far as providing education and agriculture crops. Okay. So as we move forward through a little bit more on details on the requirements for growing grapes and the challenges, but we're going to talk about opportunities. But before we do that, I have to jokingly but seriously talk about something that is very commonplace and what kind of excites people about growing grapes. But there's some thinking that is erroneous that we need to dispel. And that is, Texas isn't Tuscany, right? So I've had the privilege of traveling to Florence. Maybe you've been to Italy or somewhere in Europe, and you see these gorgeous vineyards. And let's take Tuscany, for example, right? They are a hot climate. They can get just as hot during the daytime as we can. The vines are beautiful. The fruit is perfect. The wine is fabulous. And you go, well, we're retiring. We want to grow, an acre of grapes in our backyard and make our own wine, or have someone make wine for us. Tuscany's pretty similar to Texas. And based on geography, that is not true. If you look at the lines of latitude, Texas is more similar to northern Africa and the deserts around Europe. And so geographically wise, we're more similar to Morocco, Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran. And so we are very different than Southern Europe. And so we have some similarities, but our soils are different. One of the big differences is not the daytime temperatures, it's the nighttime temperatures. Places like the Texas High Plains, where most of our commercial grapes are grown, think Lubbock area, believe it or not. They call it the Texas High Plains for a reason. It's higher elevation. It's about 3,000 feet in elevation, and that means they can get just as hot during the day, but they may cool down 10 degrees more at night than we do here in Dallas, Fort Worth. Well, same thing's true in Italy. Their nighttime temperatures, that diurnal shift is much greater. And when temperatures are around 60, maybe 50, 60 degrees at night, that allows the mother vine to rest. But in Dallas, when we're in the summer, it's 110 during the day. That mother vine is struggling to make energy and feed her children the fruit. At night, she still has to burn energy to sweat, to transpire, and that takes a lot of energy as well. And so cool temperatures is one key here that we miss out on in Texas. So not trying to be, difficult or crush your dreams. Tuscany's beautiful. Texas has a lot of potential, but we have to dispel that myth that, Texas is Tuscany. We should grow grapes. You should consider growing grapes, but it's not the same. Okay. So with that in mind, if you're going to go and grow grapes, more than one grapevine in the backyard, we have to ask ourselves, why are you doing this? Maybe it's for ag exemption. Maybe you fell in love with vineyards in Tuscany and you want to grow grapes, but you recognize what grapes we grow and how we grow them will be a little different. How are you going to make the dream work? Is your wife or husband on board? Right? Putting in a vineyard is a quick way to get to divorce, right? And so we certainly don't want to do that. So making sure your spouse, your family's on board, because this can take quite a bit of time, even on a small scale. It may take every waking weekend during the growing season, especially in the summertime. Can you tolerate the heat? Or are you going to hire someone to do that? What's your business model? Do the economics work out, right? And so a common business model or mission statement, as you could say, should be to produce clean, high quality fruit year after year at a sufficient yield that provides a profit or at least breaks even, right? And so we'll talk about economics later. But if you're actually going to do this to try to make some money, you've got to start with a business plan and a mission statement. And again, this is a great way to start, because it's going to determine your inputs, how much money you're going to spend on fertilizers and pesticides and equipment and labor and all this kind of stuff. Okay. Grapes are a long-term investment. They're perennials, and they're long-term perennials. You're typically not going to see your first harvestable crop until year 3 or 4, right? So it requires a good amount of upfront capital, and your return on investment tends to be years 4, 5, maybe even 6. Now, grapes can live for 25, 30 years if they're managed well, and maybe even longer, depending on the variety and where you're located. Okay, so if you do, again, if you're interested in taking the next step, moving forward on this, rely on your strengths and recognize your weakness, and work with people who can supplement and boost your weakness up to success. Rely on their strengths as well. And again, I'm here to walk with y'all. I'm an educator, so I'm not going to be digging holes for you. I do that myself on my own property, but I'm happy to walk with you on your journey. And maybe you say, I thought I wanted to grow grapes and I'm never going to do it. And then next year you're interested again. Hopefully this won't be the last time we talk. Let's talk about the economics, and then we'll get into to the funnest part, and that is the varieties we recommend. But just to crunch the numbers, no, again, this is not for someone who wants to grow, one grapevine on an arbor or maybe 10 in the backyard, right? Doesn't matter. It's funny. Every time I garden, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to save so much money because I planted 30 tomatoes, and I always end up spending way more than I intended. I'm not doing it for the cost savings. Some people do. I love being outside and growing things and eating high quality, nutritious food. But if you're going to grow any more than a couple dozen grapevines, you'll want to actually crunch the numbers, because it's quite expensive to establish a vineyard. And in farming, we talk in acres. And so again, remember, we have about 8,000 acres of grapes in Texas. Most of the vineyards are only about 2 to 5 acres. There are some that are a couple hundred or even 1,000, but most are fairly small, and they fit that agritourism model where you have a couple acres of grapes. Maybe you have a beautiful area that it's attracted to people, some landscaping, and you have a little market where you sell produce, or you sell jelly, maybe wine, baked goods. You host events, have weddings, that kind of thing. But that's typically what we see in the Metroplex. You may decide you want to grow just grapes and sell your fruit. I'm here to tell you that growing grapes standalone is typically not profitable until you at least get to 10 acres. That's kind of the break-even point. But when you get to 10 acres, you have to hire more than just seasonal labor. And you're going to have more than just your friends help you out at pruning and harvest, which are the two biggest demands on labor. You might have to hire a part-time vineyard manager who sprays and who turns on the irrigation and fertilizes and shoot thins and leaf pulls and hedges. And so that kind of economy of scale, you have to start building up equipment pretty quickly. Once you get to 10 acres, that's a lot of fruit. Just to give you an idea, each acre we hope will produce anywhere from 3 to 4 tons of grapes. And so if you have 10 acres, you're breaking even. You're producing about 30, maybe 40 tons of fruit. And so again, it just growing grapes is typically not profitable. So you go, oh man, I wanted to make grapes. I mean, you can make $1,500 to $2,000, $2,500 per ton, but your costs usually are around $3,000 an acre, $4,000. But then you've got the other expenses, the land, the well, the tractor, this or that, right? So, and then every year we don't get a crop. We can expect to lose some of our crop every year due to spring frost or Winter Storm Uri or Hurricane Harvey, these things out of our control. And so you can quickly see again that, it costs about $15,000 up to $30,000 just to plant the vineyard. That's the soil prep, that's the vines, the irrigation, the trellis, just to get it established. The more you do yourself, the lower it'll be. So you can do the math. And again, now when we start getting into a profit scenario is either scaling up, like I mentioned, or diversifying with agritourism, right? That's where the money is really made. Okay. So again, maybe you just want to grow a couple grapevines. You don't care about profit. That's great, right? But maybe you do, and that's a deciding factor for you, right? Especially if you want to do 1D1 ag exemption. We'll talk about that right now. I don't have a slide on it. If you're interested in growing grapes for ag exemption on your property, most counties do accept vineyards. They typically want someone to sign off who is a viticulturist or someone knowledgeable in that field, saying, that your plan looks sufficient. A lot of the tax assessors have no idea actually about vineyards and what it takes and the nuts and bolts of that. But I'm happy to work with you on that. If your county tax assessor needs a written letter saying, your plan is sufficient, that's great. Now, if you've ever looked at 1D1 ag exemption for your county, every county is a little different. You will usually see vineyard as an allowable crop, but it will say you need as much as it, the wording is, of course, in lawyer jargon, but it says something to the effect of to the level that is, deemed commercial. And fortunately, in Texas, there is no definition for what a commercial vineyard is versus a hobby vineyard. Well, our definition, the definition we use with Extension, is if you're selling your fruit or you're making wine out of that fruit or some sort of product like jelly that you're selling, then that is a commercial vineyard. Now, if you use that definition, then you could say, oh my gosh, you could have 10 grapevines, and if you sell jelly at the farmer's market, you have a commercial vineyard. Now, as far as wine goes, most wineries will not touch fruit from a grower unless it's at least 1 ton. And so if you look at that, you'd need at least 1/3 of an acre of grapes minimum. But a lot of wineries won't even touch more than, they won't even buy fruit if it's less than 3 tons. And so that's about 1 acre. So most of the time, the lowest commercial requirement for 1D1 would be planting 1 acre of grapes. All right, now you look at that cost to establish, that's about $15,000 if you're not afraid to dig your own posts and source your own material. But that would yield you about 3 to 4 tons of fruit, okay? And so, again, not going to be profitable, but you may break even on a smaller scale, especially if you make a good connection with a local winery that will pay you more. Okay, so we can quickly see, though, that having just a vineyard standalone is typically not profitable on a small scale. Again, if you beef up those numbers over 10 acres, we have a couple of vineyards that are 30 or 40 acres, 60 acres, and they're quite profitable, but they also have a winery. So again, agritourism is where it's at. You can make money on a smaller scale vineyard planting, but you're going to diversify in other ways, okay? Anywho, so I think that's it. Now, I did want to say this as well. You go, okay, well, we're going to start small, which I highly recommend no matter what you do. And you go, we're going to plant a row this year, but we might go to 1 acre or maybe 2 acres or 10 acres, whatever it is. And we want to plant a row, but let's say we want to get to 1 acre eventually. An acre is about 600 grapevines, okay? And what is the labor requirement for something smaller? Just to give you some information here, we generally say if you're a hard worker, you're not afraid of the heat, you're not afraid to work off hours after you've worked a full day. We typically say 2 people, husband and wife team, can work up to maybe 5 acres maximum in a perfect scenario, but usually 1 to 2 acres, no problem, if you're willing to work most weekends on the vineyard, okay? Once you get past about 5 acres, you're gonna have to hire some seasonal labor, maybe even a part-time person throughout the entire year. So there's different ways to do it. There are ways to be profitable, but you've really got to have a good business plan. Now, certainly, you could, for ag exemption, you could grow 1 acre of grapes. That is what I would consider the minimum number for commercial standard. And you could sell that fruit to a winery, and you may not be interested in making a profit. Maybe you just want to break even because your, quote, profit will be from the cost savings from your taxes, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, and so labor again. So remember, 2 people can manage 1 acre pretty easily, up to 5 acres if you're really dedicated. But it is a lot of work. It's a lot of outdoor work. Most of the work is done in the hottest part of the year, but it can be extremely rewarding. I mean, I'm not trying to dissuade you, but I work with about 120 grape growers, and we have a lot of new growers, many without agriculture backgrounds. And there have been a number that go, man, I wish I would have started smaller. I wish I would have known how much work this was. But then you also see the people that have never grown a grape before who have done such incredible things, and they just love it. And, obviously there's a lot of reward, even amidst the challenges. There's a lot of opportunity, because we wouldn't have a wine industry if it was all doom and gloom, right? Now, going back before we talked about varieties, let's talk a little bit more about Pierce's disease. Remember, Pierce's disease is our #1 issue, and most grapevines are susceptible to Pierce's disease. Now, Pierce's disease is a bacterial infection, and it is native to Texas, and it is spread by an insect, and that insect is also native to Texas. And if you grow roses or crepe myrtles, you may have seen this insect. There are a number of vectors of Pierce's disease, but this is the big one, and it's called the glassy-winged sharpshooter. It's very slender, and it is quick as lightning. And if you have shaken your rose bush or crepe myrtle and you see this little insect darting off, or maybe you walk by your plant and you see it quickly move to the other side of the shoot or limb, that's usually a sharpshooter. And what sharpshooters do is they are the vector. They are unknowingly spreading this bacteria because they feed on a lot of different plants. Then, in and of themselves, they're not very harmful to grapes, but because they can be spreading this bacteria when they feed, they can be a big problem. And so what happens is, here's the bottom line. Pierce's disease is native, and it's found in Dallas, Fort Worth here. So you can't avoid it. It's just a matter of time before glassy-winged sharpshooters find your vineyard and they start spreading Pierce's disease. Pierce's disease typically takes, 1 to 4 years to kill your vines. There's no cure. And once your vines have it, they will die, and it will easily spread from vine to vine. And so this is a big issue. Now, the best practice we have is trying to stop the insect from feeding, and that is through the use of an insecticide known as imidacloprid. There are others, but that is a maintenance dose that you would have to apply for the life of the vineyard twice a year. It's not very expensive, but it is something that is required if you're going to grow varieties that are susceptible. And we'll talk about those, but just to give you a little sneak peek, that would include our beloved Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Chardonnay, all the European grapes. All those grapes the Germans, Italians, French tried to grow here, we believe a lot of them died from Pierce's disease. And so those are not native, right? So they're not used to this disease. What happens is that bacteria plugs up the water pipes of the grapevine, and in the heat of the summer, that grapevine can't move water around, and the vine collapses. And it's very similar to symptoms of general water stress. So this is a big problem. So before you plant grapes, we want to make sure we have an action plan for Pierce's disease. Now, the good news is there are a number of grapevines. There's not a lot, but there are a few that are Pierce's disease tolerant. So genetically, they are protected from Pierce's disease. So you don't have to apply an insecticide. You don't have to worry about it. And I'll talk about those later. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to have a sip of water real quick. If you have any questions, type them in the chat. We're rocking and rolling. Hope y'all are finding this interesting. If not, too bad, because I am. So anyways, just kidding. So I've given you a little bit of a snapshot here. Let me make sure. I want to see. Okay, good. So before we get into the how-to, let's talk about what we can grow. Okay. So guys, we can grow almost any grapevine there is, but there's a caveat to that. Most of the grapevines that we would want to grow, we could grow here, but even if we could keep them alive, their quality is not going to be on par with what we would expect. And here's a great example. Most of us, if we drink wine, are familiar with Cabernet Sauvignon. It is the king of grapes all across the world. It's the most recognizable grapevine in the world. And you could go to Kroger or Walmart and you'll see Cabernet Sauvignon wine. And Cabernet Sauvignon is grown in Texas. It's one of the top varieties. It's very high maintenance, and the quality, it's going to be very, let me say this. It is very unlikely that you will make a Cabernet Sauvignon wine that is like a Napa Cabernet. Now, we can make nice Cabernet here, but it's going to be a different aromatic and flavor profile. It will be very soft. It will be not as fruit forward. It'll be a little more rustic, old world. It's going to be more acid forward. It can be hard to balance this and that. All right, maybe a little lower alcohol too. So just give you an idea. Even if we wanted to grow some of these noble grapes, these grapes that are very familiar, we may not get the same flavor and aroma, but also these grapes are not native. They're not as well adapted to our soil. They need to be grown on a rootstock. They need very particular care. They all get Pierce's disease. So it can be very challenging. Most of us don't want to make that kind of investment and don't want to take on that kind of risk. So what are your options? Well, we have grapes that are high maintenance, grapes that are moderate maintenance, and grapes that are low maintenance. And so I'm going to talk about those right now. So these are your options, right? We can break our options down as far as what kind of grapes we want to grow, whether it's in the backyard or in a commercial vineyard setting. We can break them down into three groups. The first group is what we call the European grape variety group, also known as Vitis vinifera. That's the scientific name for about 8,000 different types of European grapes. Okay, these grape varieties are fabulous for making wine. There are grape varieties in this category that are great for fresh eating. You may be familiar with Thompson seedless or Flame seedless or even cotton candy. Y'all know that grape variety. Those have European parentage in their genetic background. These grapes are not from the United States. Their genetics originate from Europe, actually from the Fertile Crescent. And therefore, they are all susceptible to Pierce's disease. They are all susceptible to about a dozen different pests and diseases. They are not well adapted to our soils and our hot climate and our spring frosts and this and that, right? So they're very high maintenance. You're going to have a perfect site. You're going to have to spend a lot of money on canopy management. You're going to have to spray a lot. And even then, it's still risky of whether you'll get a good crop. But so most people in our commercial wineries do grow grapes from this category because they may not be as well adapted, but the fruit quality is very high for wine. But instead of growing grapes that are from northern France or Germany or northern Spain, northern Italy, they're going to grow grapes that, although they're still high maintenance, they're better adapted to at least our hot climate. And so we're seeing grapes that are now European being grown commercially that are from Spain, southern Spain, central southern Spain, like Tempranillo or Albarino, or from Portugal. Grapes from the southern Rhone Valley in France, like Mourvedre, Grenache, Syrah, Tannat, Picpoul Blanc, grapes from southern Italy and Sicily, like Negro Amaro and Montepulciano and Aglianico and Sangiovese and Dolcetto, and even maybe grapes from Greece, although I haven't seen a lot from there. Okay, so those grapes still get Pierce's disease. They're still high maintenance, but they are better adapted to our heat. So they're a little lower maintenance than grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon, certainly Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and varieties like that, Malbec. The list goes on and on. All right, Cabernet Franc. So that's the first group, super high maintenance, although this is what's kind of standard for our commercial wineries, at least in the Metroplex. East Texas, we see more muscadines and hybrids. Our second option, and what most backyard growers will start growing, are the American varieties. All right, have you heard of Concord, right? Welch's Grape Juice and Jelly? That is an American grape variety. It's not from Europe. Black Spanish, you may have heard of that one. Cynthiana or Lenoir, Lenoir, which is Black Spanish. Cynthiana or Norton, those are the same grape varieties. Those are all pure American. There are also hybrid grapes that are what we call French American, or their mother or father was American, so you get good adaptability to our soils, our climate. but you get that European influence, so you get better fruit quality, right? So that's the second group. They're either low to moderately high maintenance, but they're not going to be high maintenance. Now, some American varieties will get Pierce's disease and some don't. All right, I'll give you some examples in a little bit. And then the last group of grapes that we can grow here in Texas are the muscadines, Muscadinia rotundifolia. Again, they just changed the taxonomic name. And those, though, remember, require acidic soil. So if you happen to have an acidic sandy loam in your backyard, you are beyond blessed. And I am incredibly jealous, and I pray that you will grow something, because that soil is not very common. We are typically cursed with black gumbo clay, and that's what I have. It's very difficult to work, right? There are grapes, though, that will grow in it, okay? So again, depending on what you're willing to invest is going to be indicative of what you grow, right? But we have options. Okay. Let me check the chat real quick. I think we're good, right? So moving forward, before we actually go into the specifics, let me kind of talk about the site requirements for grapes. Do you have what it takes to have reduce the risk of failure, right? Anytime we grow a garden, we want to do everything we can before we plant that crop to minimize our risk of failure, minimize the amount of money we have to invest and spend, and try to minimize the mistakes we'll make, right? So does site really matter? Is my backyard suitable? Is this piece of property suitable for growing grapes? I'm happy to work with you on that. I do site visits. I charge mileage for that, and I'm happy to come out to your property and we can look at growing grapes. Just let me know. This is the most important decision: is where are you going to put the vineyard? Well, there's a lot at play here, right? Now, I've talked about some of the challenges, like Pierce's disease and other fungal pathogens and spring frost. But as far as site goes, there are three, because we have Pierce's disease here, right? We have fungal pathogens here. We can't escape those. But there are three things that can help us determine if this site is suitable, that grapes are very sensitive with. The first is spring frost. We talked about that. So what can you do? Well, try not to plant your grapevine in a low spot, right? Y'all experienced this before, probably, if you've ever been sitting on your back patio during the spring and it's warm during the day, but at night there's no clouds, there's no wind, it's very still. You might have walked down to that pond down low from the porch, and you notice it's cooler there than where you are on the porch. And that's because cool air is heavier than warm air, and under a certain type of frost condition called a radiational event, cold air sinks to the ground, and the lower the ground is, the easier it is for that cold air to sit and accumulate, right? So first thing, don't plant your grapes down in the low spot, all right, topographically speaking. Also, we can plant a variety that wakes up later. There are some grapes like Chardonnay that wakes up in February, late February. Well, in North Texas, our spring frost risk isn't until mid-March at minimum, if not later than that. And so that is a high-risk grape to grow, because there's a good chance it's going to get frozen out when bud break happens, when that grape wakes up and starts growing, and we'll probably lose our crop. There's not a lot of Chardonnay grown here. It's a very high-risk grape to grow, okay? So spring frost is an issue. Another issue as far as site is concerned is drainage. Grapes do not like standing in water. And unfortunately, if you're on a black gumbo clay or Houston clay, a very heavy clay-based soil, you're probably going to have drainage issues. There's a way to test. It's called a percolation test. I'll give you instructions on that later. Okay, but you could maybe, there are some ways to ameliorate that, installing drainage, putting in compost in the soil, doing raised beds, raised berms, that kind of thing can help minimize waterlogging and improve the infiltration of water after a rainfall event or an irrigation event even. So grapes don't like sitting in water for more than about a day and a half. Okay, so we need to make sure that when we get rain, that we don't have poorly draining soil. And the third thing as far as site goes is salt. Salt in the soil and salt in the water. Most of us are on the Trinity or Woodbine aquifer, And depending on where you are and the depth of your well, you may be more saline, and that sodium in particular, sodium level may be too high. And over time, that salt will stick to your soil and it will accumulate and it can kill your grapevines. Okay. Same thing's true though also if you have city water, because where are they getting that water? Well, it may be from a lake. If that's the case, there's a good chance the water is going to be pretty clean, but it may be coming from a well, right? So it just depends on your source. But we want to check water as well, especially for growing things commercially. Excuse me. They turned off the air conditioning in my room. They're trying to get me out of this building. I'm just kidding. They did turn off the AC, and it's warm in here, so that's why I am sweating. I also am getting excited, so it makes me start to sweat. Anyways, okay. So we know as far as site goes, we need a good draining, good soil with good drainage, good internal drainage. We want to grow grapes on the high part of the property if we have the option. And we want to make sure our water is clean and also that we have enough water to irrigate our grapes if we need to during drought. This year was absolutely horrible and really tested growers' ability to water with our drought. Okay. Other than that, will grapes grow in my soil? Well, with the exception of muscadines, most will, depending, regardless of whether you have a clay or a sand or a silt loam. It doesn't really matter as much as long as the soil drains well. There is a caveat to that, and that is what is the nutrient availability. I'm not going to go into great detail on this, but whether you grow tomatoes or grapes or peaches, this is universal, what I'm about to say. If you go and get a soil test of your backyard and that soil test comes back and says you've got plenty of nutrition, you've got nitrogen, you've got phosphorus, you know, it's like the Oprah show, you know, you get something, we got plenty of stuff for everybody. If your soil test comes back and you've got all this nutrition, you've got plenty of every single nutrient, you may think to yourself, wow, I've got a great soil, I'm ready to plant whatever it is, and I'm going to have no issues. Unfortunately, that's not true, because whether you have these nutrients in abundance or not, depending on this, the soil's pH, those nutrients may or may not be soluble and available to the plant. So let me explain that. If you look at this chart here, there are a number of nutrients that are required for plant growth. Again, whether you've got an oak tree in the backyard or a fruit or vegetable or an ornamental, doesn't matter. This is all universally true. They all need these nutrients, right? Maybe in some cases more or less. But if my pH is more alkaline, look where this band narrows, nitrogen. Even if it's in the soil, it's less available to the plant. And this is especially true for iron and zinc. And so depending on your pH, you may have to fertilize more than your next door neighbor because your pH is more alkaline. And even if you have it in the soil test says you've got it in quantity, but it's not going to be available to the plant. So what can you do? Well, you can try to acidify your soil. That's extremely difficult, very expensive, and not long lived in high cation exchange capacity soils like our clays. We can raise the pH very easily with limestone, but it's very hard to go acidic. You can add sulfur, but it may show a slight benefit, decrease in decrease in alkalinity or pH, but it's not going to last long. Okay, so we can try to acidify our soil, but what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to spend a little extra money and either bypass the soil by foliar spraying certain nutrients like iron and zinc as needed, or we're going to have to spend more money on applying a granular fertilizer that is chelated or protected from the pH of the soil. So what I'm saying is if you need to get a soil test. It's cheap. It's like 15, 20 bucks. The most important thing is your pH. We can add fertilizer, no problem. But if you're on an alkaline soil, which most of us are, you're inherently going to have more of a challenge and more cost associated with trying to grow this crop. And again, that's true for almost any crop. There is, especially those that prefer a more acidic soil. But even those that are more alkaline tolerant, they can be more challenging, okay? Because you've got an alkaline soil, you got limited nutrient availability, even if the nutrients are there, all right? So this doesn't mean we can't grow grapes. It just means we have to pay attention, and we may have to realize that we have to invest a little more in nutrition and more expensive fertilizers. So if you're a prospective grower, you want to grow a couple grapevines in the backyard or 10,000, the first thing we need to do is, again, check our website out, look at the Pierce's Disease Guide, the Starting a Vineyard Guide. I'm happy to do one-on-one site evaluation if you're in my region. If not, we've got another viticulturist who can help you. But take a soil test, okay? If you're going to grow more than a couple grapevines, get a water quality test. You fill up a water bottle with your tap water, your well water, your pond water, and we can look at the quality. And also assess your soil's drainage. And you can do this for anything you want to grow. These three tests are vital for minimizing mistakes and failures and minimizing, the amount of wasted investment in monetarily speaking. And a percolation test, again, that's that drainage test. You dig a hole, you fill it up with water, you see how long it takes to drain. The instructions are right here for free on how to do that, okay? But you'll want to look at that. Oops, I doubled this. Oops, I put those in the wrong spot. Okay. So now we've talked a little bit about site requirements. Most people are able to amend their site for planting grapes, right? You may not be able to plant every grapevine variety due to maintenance requirements and that kind of thing. But there's usually a grape that we can plant in just about any soil. And so again, let's actually go through grapevines that are moderate to low maintenance. All right. So we're not going to talk about high maintenance grapes right now. Those are the European grapes. If you want to talk more about recommendations for that, I can help you find the lowest maintenance ones in that category, but they're still high maintenance. All right. What I'm going to talk about are grapes you could grow in your backyard. You could even grow them on a small scale commercially and sell them at the farmer's market or make wine out of them, maybe for personal use, or you have a winery yourself that are going to be low to moderate maintenance, right? The first are going to be those muscadines. There are a number of muscadines we have trialed with Texas A&M, and we have trialed them under what we call earth-kind principles. In a nutshell, these grapes have been put under the most strenuous, rigorous testing. They've received no pesticides, no fertilizer. We've mulched them to keep weeds at bay and to maintain soil moisture and long-term addition of organic matter through that degradation. And so these varieties I'm going to recommend, the ones I point out, are going to be results from those earth-kind trials, but we've tried some of these other ones, okay? As far as muscadines go, there are bronze muscadines and there are black muscadines and red muscadines or purple. And there are a number of varieties that do well, but it's ideal to plant ones that are self-fertile, which means they can make fruit on their own without a pollinizer, okay? And so here are a couple of varieties that we have grown. Now remember, muscadines are the only varieties that actually need acidic soil because they will not function well. They will get iron deficiency, which we can try to fix, but they also just do not tolerate acidic soil and for other reasons. That's similar to blueberries, right? If you ever tried to grow blueberries in an alkaline soil, they're not going to live long. I actually grow blueberries because I have alkaline soil in large 30-gallon containers with composted pine bark, and that does very well. I've got about 30 of those, 30 different varieties. So you could do that if you wanted to, but not in the soil and not in the ground, unless it's a raised bed, but that still could be problematic. Anyways, I digress. If you have acidic soil, you may like muscadines. It's a very nostalgic taste for those who grew up with them. Some people hate them, but they are grapevines. And so they are seeded and they tend to have a very thick skin. They're great for fresh eating, though, good for sweet style wine. There is a new muscadine that I have, my colleagues have. We don't have data on it, but it is the first ever seedless and it also happens to be a very thin-skinned muscadine called Oh My. Again, I can't recommend this on a commercial scale yet, but certainly on a backyard scale, if you want a seedless, fresh-eating grape, it will make wine, but it's very aromatic, very candy-like. You can get it from Gurney Seed Catalog. They have the exclusive rights to it. Now, I like to say it's Oh My because the flavor is delicious, but it also has a sticker shock. I like to say it's called Oh My because it is, I think, still $60 or $70 a vine, which is about 10 times more than what it typically costs to buy a grapevine, right? So anyways, but you may want to put one up in arbor or pergola and you love muscadines, this would be one to consider, okay? So what hybrids, though, do well? Let me say one other thing. There is a muscadine hybrid. Muscadines are actually genetically different than all the other bunch grapes. The grapes with big clusters, muscadines tend to have large berries, but very few berries in a bunch. But there is one variety of muscadine that is actually a interspecific hybrid. And so if you really like muscadines, you want to put one in your backyard, but you've got alkaline soil. We have trialed this one. It's called Southern Home. This is actually it. It's a black muscadine. It has beautiful foliage, very ornamental. It looks more like Japanese maple leaves. You only need one. It's self-fertile, doesn't get Pierce's disease, and its fruit is very muscadine in flavor. But because it's an interspecific hybrid of muscadines and bunch grapes, it will tolerate more alkaline soil. And it has done quite well, even up here in Dallas, Fort Worth. You can get this online through mail order from Florida. That's where it comes from. But that's another one I forgot to mention. So aside from muscadines, though, because those are pretty darn low maintenance, but there's not a huge market for them, commercially at least here in the Metroplex. If you were in East Texas, there's a niche market there. But what about hybrid grapes? We know about the European grapes and they're high maintenance, but what about these other grapes you may not have heard of that are much lower maintenance? The first is Champanelle. And guess what, guys? This was bred in 1893 by that guy. Remember that guy I talked about, seems like 2 hours ago? T.V. Munson. He bred this grape in Denison, Texas. And this grape is probably the lowest maintenance bunch grape that we have available to us. It's multi-use. It is seeded. The grapes I'm going to recommend coming up will be Pierce's disease tolerant, including Champanelle, will be low maintenance, will get disease and pests, but not as much as other grapes. So it requires little to no spray. Of course, if you don't spray, whether it's an organic or conventional pesticide, you'll get less fruit because you might lose it to disease, but you'll typically still get a good harvest, good quality fruit, and self-fertile. So you only need one. You can plant more, but you only need one to get fruit. You don't need a pollinizer. Champanelle, again, was bred by T.V. Munson, and it has Labrusca in its background. And if you're not familiar with Labrusca, that is Concord. Okay, if you like Welch's grape juice and jelly, you like that kind of American foxy, what we call Labrusca flavor, right? That grapey flavor that's in all our artificial grape. When we talk about artificial grape flavor, that comes from Concord. It's methyl and thranolate. That is the flavor they're trying to mimic. Champanelle has that in its parentage, so it's essentially a hot climate Concord. Although Concord is, you can buy it here, and it is a Native American grape, it is not native to the South. It is from New York. It's from Massachusetts. It's a northeastern grape, so it's not very hot tolerant. This grape is just like Concord, but it is well adapted to our clay soils, our alkaline soils, our heat, our humidity. It doesn't get Pierce's disease. It has very showy leaves with white undersides, so very, very beautiful contrast. It can produce 10, 15 pounds of fruit per vine. Great for jelly, good for juice. It'll make a sweet wine. You can eat it fresh, but it is seeded. Okay. Another one is Lamonto. This is another T.V. Munson variety, bred in 1902. Now, T.V. Munson was around when Texas A&M was there. And being an Aggie, I'm a little biased, but T.V. Munson should have called this the Aggie vine, not Lamonto, because this vine produces smaller clusters than Champanelle, but they're super filled with black color. They are so colorful. There's so much color in the fruit, it'll stain your concrete under the arbor or pergola, so maybe not the best choice for that. It'll stain your hands, your teeth, super dark color, beautiful. And there's so much color that's produced that even the shoots, which typically are green in grapevines, turn maroon, hence the Aggie name I will bestow upon it. We'll call this the Aggie grape, which it's Lamanto. All right. This one does well on our clay soil. It's a little less vigorous. So if you have a little smaller of a space, Lamanto will probably work quite well. It gets very few diseases, no Pierce's disease issues. It makes the best jelly I have ever had. In fact, the Dallas County Master Gardeners I work with, we have a trial there with Lamanto, submitted their Lamanto jelly. There were over 1,000 jelly entries in the state fair, and they won first place. Actually, all 4 top places were won by them in the jelly they made from these varieties, including Lamanto. But Lamanto is the best jelly I've ever had. It is seeded. You can make juice out of it. You can eat them fresh, but it also makes a very nice dry style, soft, fresh wine. So you could do that. I get commercially, on a small scale, you could certainly make your own wine from this, sell jelly, sell the fresh fruit, but there's not a huge market as far as commercial wines are concerned, because it's just not a well-known variety. Miss Blanc is from Mississippi. It's a white grape that is very low maintenance. It loves our humidity, our heat, and it produces a white grape. And if any of y'all have had Moscato wine, the parent flavor of that is what we call Muscat. And it's in the Muscat family, this Moscato. And so it has this really rich, unique kind of fruity aroma and flavor that is found in Miss Blanc. Miss Blanc makes a great neutral jelly, makes fabulous juice, great for baking. As far as you could bake the fruit, but it's seeded. But as far as incorporating that juice as a flavoring agent, and it makes a nice semi-sweet or sweet wine. It's a nice one. It's also very beautiful. The foliage is very waxy and a deep green. And it's a good option for an arbor or pergola because the berries won't stain the ground. Okay. Now this grape and the next one are lower maintenance grapes, but they do require occasional fungicide application sprays. This one's Black Spanish. It is one of the most popular wine grapes. You can make jelly and juice and eat it fresh, but it is seeded. But it is very well suited to dessert wines like port. And so you may consider growing this. It's easy to locate. A lot of our nurseries sell it locally, but it is an old grape that is very well suited to port style wine. And it does have some commercial applicability in the market here in North Texas. Okay, Blanc du Bois is the #1 hybrid white grape in the state of Texas. It does not get Pierce's disease. It's from Florida. It's self-fertile. It is a little more susceptible to fungus than the other grapes I've mentioned before. But if you want to make jelly or juice or wine from it, it makes fabulous wine, whether it's fully dry or fully sweet and everywhere in between. Very aromatic. It is a fantastic grape to grow, but it does require some pesticide applications, especially in regards to fungus. Okay. Now, this is brand new to 2020 or 2021, I think 2020. And this is new offerings from UC Davis. There are 5 new grapevine varieties that have been released that are European, but that have Pierce's disease naturally bred in to their genetic background. So while Black Spanish and Blanc du Bois have Pierce's disease tolerance bred into their genetic background, they may be primarily, maybe 50% or more, hybrid, which gives some unique fruit qualities that may not be acceptable to the common market. Well, they have Pierce's disease in California, and so this has been a big interest. And these new varieties, which are available as mail order, are 97% European, so they have excellent quality. They are for winemaking, but they do not get Pierce's disease, and that's a big win. There's 5 varieties, 3 reds and 2 whites. There's information here you can read later about them. We're really excited, especially in East Texas and the Gulf Coast and parts of North Texas, where people just want to grow European type grapes. They don't want to bother with the hybrids, but they don't want to invest in the risk of growing the traditional European grapes. These are brand new, and we're trialing them right now with Extension. And we've been doing so for some of the varieties, but not all. So we are really looking into this right now. So this is an option, whether you have a couple grapes in the backyard or 1,000. If you want to grow a European type grape that doesn't get Pierce's disease, but there's a big but here, they still will get every other disease. So you will have to spray these with fungicides. And unfortunately, growing grapes organically, I'm not here to champion for one way of growing or another, whether that's organic or conventional. But the truth is as of right now, there are a number of fungal pathogens where we don't have good organic controls. And so we will have to use conventional pesticides, in particular fungicides, which are still very safe. But just keep that in mind. These will require a number of fungicide sprays. To give you an idea, because of our disease pressure, the rain, the moisture that we get during the growing season, it's not uncommon to spray grapevines up to 12 or more times a year for fungus. Okay, so that is not out of the realm of possibility. And these European grapes are there. Lamanto, Champanelle, you may never have to spray. You'll get a little bit less yield. So if you did spray once or twice, timed appropriately, you might get more crop. But Champanelle, Lamanto are pretty much low, and Miss Blanc, no spray. Black Spanish, Blanc du Bois require a few sprays, maybe half as many as the Europeans in a normal year. Okay, the UC Davis European Pierce's disease tolerant grapes will need the full spray program. Okay, now I've mentioned these grapes all can be eaten fresh, but guess what, guys? They're all seeded. And that doesn't bother me, but it may bother your millennial son or daughter, or your 2-year-old, or I don't know. Can you give grapes to 2-year-olds? I don't know. I'm not a parent. So anyways, what can we recommend? Because I do not recommend Flame seedless or Thompson seedless because they have a myriad of issues, including Pierce's disease susceptibility. But are there any grapes for table use that I could grow in the backyard? Or could I grow this for 1D1 ag exemption and sell to a farmer's market or a U-pick? And the answer is yes. Now, in the past, there's been only one grape that we can recommend with Extension. It's still a great grape. It's a Texas A&M Superstar. It's a fairly low maintenance grape. It's a little finicky. It's called Victoria Red. It is a true table grape. Now, if you don't know, table grapes are different than most wine grapes because they're bred differently. They are bred to be large, to be thin-skinned, to be crunchy, to be seedless, hopefully, and to have very sweet aroma and more of a table grape style flavor and aroma. And so wine grapes are bred to have usually smaller fruit because you get more skin, which is where the color and the tannins come from, and they're bred to be sweet, but they're also bred to have other qualities and other flavors and aromas, okay? So table grape. So Victoria Red is a true table grape. You can make juice out of it and jelly, but it's not going to be great, and it's not going to make a good wine. Now, it is slightly seeded, so it is not fully seedless, but it makes this beautiful rose blush, berries about this size in big clusters. It does require the occasional fungicide spray, okay? But I'm happy to report that as of this spring of 2022, a new grapevine has come on the scene. It is a joint release of University of Arkansas and Texas A&M, and it is called Southern Sensation Seedless. It is the first ever seedless green table grape that does not get Pierce's disease, that is low maintenance, that produces a seedless table grape, right? So super excited about this one. It has been trialed in College Station. It's been trialed in Central Texas and Stephenville, and it's done very well. I'm curious to see how well it does in Dallas-Fort Worth because we have a little more disease pressure than Stephenville because we get more rain. But I've got some. We're trialing it right now. So this, if you want a seedless green table grape, large fruit, crunchy, great texture, great flavor, a slightly fruity taste to it, perfect for fresh eating, great for the kids. This could be a great U-pick or farmer's market sell, not good for wine or jelly. But this would be it. Very low maintenance, okay? Now, there aren't many nurseries that are willing to propagate a grape that is new, that may or may not have a great market. Now, it's going to do well here in Texas, and also most of the South. But there is one vineyard, and one nursery rather, it is a vineyard as well, that has the exclusive rights. This is a patented grape, and that's called AA Vineyards out of New York State. And you go, why the heck is this Texas grape being sold exclusively out of a New York nursery? Well, AA is known for selling unique hybrid grapes, and they were the only ones willing to commercialize this. So that's why you can only get it from this nursery. It's mail order, and the vines are not very expensive. They're like, I don't know, $8-10 a vine, so pretty inexpensive. So anyway, so we're super excited about this. It's brand new as of this year, and so that's that. Okay, now moving on, we've talked about what grapes you may want to grow. We've kind of scratched the surface. Again, excuse me, I'm happy to answer questions or go into more detail on a one-on-one basis later. But that's kind of just gives you an idea of what we have to work with. Now, remember, grapevines are vines, right? They're a lianas, they're a woody vine. And so they need a support structure. Now, you can grow grapes on a pergola or arbor as long as it's sturdy enough. Grapes, if you want them to fruit, need full sun, 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. Ideally, they would get full sun from 7 o'clock in the morning till about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then get some afternoon shade. That's pretty hard to get here in most settings, but full sun is ideal, okay? You could also grow grapes on a pergola, I'm sorry, not a pergola, on a fence line. Now that fence needs to be strong enough, and ideally it would be a rail fence like this where you get airflow and sunlight, not a situation like this. This situation on the bottom, if you were a master gardener or if you've got a lot of gardening experience, you would probably immediately know why. But we don't know if this is getting full sun, but also it's up against this fence that gets no airflow. And when you have no airflow, you have moisture that stays around longer than it should in the canopy, and that means you're going to get a higher risk or have a higher risk of disease. Okay, so this is a no-no. You may have some success, especially with some of the lower maintenance hybrids, but most likely you're not going to reach your full potential here. Now, if you're going to grow more than a couple grapevines, you will want to grow these on an actual trellis system. Fortunately, a trellis system, it looks complicated, but it's not. You can source almost all of the materials locally at your hardware store or fencing company. They can install this. And so we could go through that later, but I'm not going to bore you on that. We do have specific trellis designs where these wires will be. We train our grapevines in Texas to a T shape. So you'll have 1 or 2 trunks, and then you'll have these arms that we call cordons. And from those arms, every year you'll have green shoots with fruit. And so depending on the variety, will determine the trellis system you'll utilize. Okay, so just for your information, these are the 2 most common trellis systems. If you're going to grow a European grape variety, you would use this, what we call a VSP system, or vertical shoot position mid-wire system. The cordon or the arms come to about your waist, about 32 to 42 inches, and you have a series of catch wires, right? You'll see this in most vineyards. If you're growing these hybrids like Lamanto or Blanc du Bois or Champanelle or Muscadines, you'll have the same T shape, but the cordon or arms will come up to about head height, and they'll cascade down because they like to grow more procumbently. Okay, so those are the general trellis designs depending on the variety. Now, another important factor is going to be vine spacing. You got to have enough room for these vines to grow and produce fruit. And depending on the variety and the inherent vigor of your site, we may go either shorter spacing or larger spacing. Most grapevines need about 7 to 8 feet in North Texas from vine to vine on your trellis or in your garden. Muscadines are the exception. Muscadines need a lot more room. They need anywhere from 12 to 20 feet to grow, okay? So keep that in mind. We do not want to plant our grapevines too close together. That is a recipe for disaster. Row orientation, not as particular. You'll hear people say, oh, it's got to be north-south. That's common. Up in the Northeast where they don't get as much solar radiation, that's true, a shorter growing season. But guys, one of the nice things about Texas is we have a long growing season. We get plenty of solar radiation. So the main thing is orient your rows to the prevailing winds. If you decide to do this, maybe for 1D1, or you want to grow grapes commercially, or more than just a few, and you've got a trellis, plant them according to the prevailing winds, so they don't blow this up. This is in McKinney. This was a vineyard that planted their grapes for aesthetics first. So when you drove down, you would see through the rows. That is very pretty, but the prevailing winds butted up, went perpendicular, and blew over their rows, and that was an absolute nightmare. All right, we have a lot of wind in North Texas, so making sure the wind blows down the rows and not against it is important. All right, we're almost done, guys. The next question is, okay, I'm getting excited. I might want to grow this variety. I want to grow it on an arbor. When do I plant? If you want to know where to get grapes from, I can recommend some nurseries later, but I won't do that publicly here. But here's kind of the step-by-step process. You'll order your grapes one of two ways, either what we call bare root, which means you'll get dormant little sticks that are asleep, or you'll buy them containerized and they're green, right? They've got leaves. Planting time, the window for planting in North Texas is critical. It's quite short. Bare root plants, you're typically looking into February through early March to April. Early April is probably the most ideal time because you want to avoid spring frost, but you want to plant them before we start getting hot. Now, if you have a potted vine that's green, you could go to end of April, maybe the first week in May, but ideally April is planting time. Okay, you're going to plant these grapes in the ground. You could have the holes pre-dug, that's fine. And you're going to be growing roots for the first year. So no fruit. We got to implement tough love, right? You mothers know how to implement tough love, more so than probably most others out there. You may understand that concept very well, and fathers too. But I like to joke about that with mothers, especially. They seem to connect immediately. I know exactly what you're talking about. It may not be fun, but it's for the good of the child or the plant, whatever. And so we need to implement tough love. No fruit the first year on any type of grape variety. And we're going to grow that vine, and it's going to be kind of unkept. We're going to start training a nice trunk, but our main focus is establishing the roots. Okay, that mother vine needs to establish herself before she can handle children. Year 2, we're building out the arms. We're continuing to build out the roots. We may have a little bit of fruit, but usually no fruit. Year 3, we can usually expect a light to moderate crop, but not a full crop. And then by year 4, we're in full production, and hopefully we'll have full production for the rest of the life of the vineyard. Keeping in mind that it is common to lose fruit at once every 5 years, or maybe more frequently. The last few years have been really difficult. Okay, so it typically takes about 3 to 4 years to get into production. So it's a bit of a waiting game. All right. Now, for those interested, can you propagate your own grapevines? The answer is yes. Some grapes are patented, so you're not legally allowed to. But if you have access to wood, you can propagate grapes either as hardwood cuttings or green cuttings. Muscadines tend to propagate best as green cuttings, but everything else as dormant hardwood cuttings. If you want to learn more about this, we've got videos on. If you're not familiar with Aggie Horticulture on Facebook, we have a great Facebook page, and twice a week we do little educational videos for free, and they're recorded and posted. So I've done a video on how to take grape cuttings and make your own grapevines from a friend's vineyard. You can do that. Now, there are some challenges with this and some risks like spreading disease and the issue with rootstock, but we won't get into that today. But technically, yes, you can root your own grapevines. Okay, so we have a little bit better understanding of, what varieties are better adapted, what my potential inputs would be and challenges, how I would grow these grapes, what the outlook is. I want to just give you a few more resources if you really start getting interested in this. Again, maybe I've totally turned you off from growing grapes, and hopefully that saved you a little heartache and money. Hopefully I didn't do that, though. I really think even growing one grape in an edible landscape has a lot of value. and it's not that difficult. I'm an Aggie, and if I can do it, you can do it, right? But maybe I've encouraged you to follow up with a 1D1 ag exemption or growing half an acre for fun for making your own wine. Texas does have one of the most active hobbyist winemakers guild. It's called the North Texas Winemakers Guild. And so you may want to look into joining that if you want to learn how to make wine on a small scale. But anyways, I've got a couple other resources for you. If you really start getting interested, we have a pocket guide that walks you through the common and uncommon disorders for Texas. So that's available. I showed you our website earlier on with free fact sheets. This is the Starting a Vineyard Guide, which you can get for free. We have a pest spray guide. We have a bunch of regional groups. We have master gardener groups you can get involved with. We also have there's only one published book on growing grapes in Texas. And guess what? It's aptly named. It's called Growing Grapes in Texas. It's by my colleague, Jim Thomas out of Fredericksburg, a great introductory read. This book is more in depth and more, I don't know how I would say it, but it's different than the Starting a Vineyard Guide. The Starting a Vineyard Guide is the nuts and bolts if you want to actually start a small scale or commercial vineyard. This book gives you more history, a little more story, but also a lot of great information and a little more detail. Okay. What else was I going to tell you? The Pierce's Disease Management Guide is for free. Remember, that's on our website. So look at that. Here's the website again. Here's our Facebook page. Hopefully you'll like us. I offer hands-on workshops. If you have a grapevine and you want to learn how to prune a grapevine, I offer those types of workshops every year, hands-on. So if you subscribe to our Facebook page, you'll be informed about when we have our workshops. I do classes on homemade wine production. I'm doing a 3-day winemaking course in Dallas. If you want to find out about that, check out the Dallas County Master Gardener website, and you'll be given fruit. We'll make wine out of locally grown organic fruit from step 1 to step bottle. This is my email, so if you ever have questions, you can let me know. But that kind of wraps up our discussion on the nuts and bolts, on the potential for growing grapes, 1 in the backyard or 10,000 in North Texas. So we've got a lot of resources with Extension. Again, Jacqueline's a great resource. We work together a lot, and I want to thank her for having me on in this series. If there are any questions, you can unmute yourself and we can chat, or if not.
We do have one in the chat.
Okay, I see it.
How difficult is to graft a different type of grapevine onto an established Mustang grapevine?
Okay, Erica, that's a great question, and I'm actually going to answer that. I'm gonna pose another question, and I'll answer yours and this one at the same time. So, for any of y'all who grow fruits or vegetables right now, whether you got a peach tree or a tomato, I wouldn't say tomatoes. You can actually graft tomatoes onto a rootstock, but let's say you bought a house and you want a couple fruit trees in the backyard, and you go to Home Depot or Lowe's. They're going to have a nice selection of fruit trees. Typically, they're quite large, and they may or may not have the best variety, but typically they're pretty good with fruit trees. Believe it or not, those are almost always grafted onto a rootstock. So the rootstock is some other type of peach tree, like Nemegard is one, and it has roots that are better adapted to the soil and can help that plant survive and thrive better than if it was on its what we call own roots. And so grapes are the same way. A lot of our hybrid grapes, because their genetics are American, at least partially, they don't need a rootstock. So your Lamanto, your Blanc du Bois, your Champanelle, your Miss Blanc, your Southern Home, those don't need rootstocks. Black Spanish doesn't need a rootstock. But your European grape varieties, your UC Davis varieties, need rootstocks because the roots are not native. They'll get phylloxera and nematodes, and they're not as well adapted to drought conditions or waterlogged conditions. So typically a rootstock is important. Your citrus are typically on a rootstock. A lot of different fruits we buy locally, the trees are on a rootstock. Okay, avocados are on rootstock, pecans. Anyways, so to answer your question on grapes, if you need a rootstock, you can do it yourself. If you have access to a rootstock and what we call the scion, or the variety you want to actually get fruit from. I don't think I have it in I talk about it in the video on Aggie Horticulture on Facebook about propagating grapes, but I haven't demonstrated that. I'm going to try to record a video this winter about that. We also demonstrate it Dr. Tim Hartman and I, he's our fruit specialist. We do hands-on grafting workshop. There'll be one in Tarrant County this April. So I highly recommend you encourage that. But Erica, to answer your question, if you specifically want to graft a variety, let's say Lamanto or Champanelle, and you have Mustang grape, unfortunately, both Mustang grape and Muscadine grapes, number one, they do not root well if you wanted to take cuttings, and number two, they do not graft well. And so it can be done, but it is very difficult, even for a skilled propagator. So unfortunately, you can definitely try it. You can buy a grafting tool on Amazon, and you can, propagate a bunch, and hopefully you might have a couple successful ones. You could also top work in the field, but that's a skill that is requires a lot of experience, and I can do it, but I'm not very good at it. I can propagate vines from cuttings and grafting and on bench very easily, but to answer your question, on Muscadine as a rootstock, it's very difficult. However, you could graft onto Champanelle. That would be a great rootstock, or you might know someone who has a vine that has rootstock available. But to answer your question, it's probably going to be unsuccessful if you try to graft onto Mustang or Muscadine, because they don't graft well, unfortunately. Okay, great question. Now, Jacqueline has put a program survey link in the chat. So if you're not aware, we are state funded, and the state wants to know if we're doing our job. And the best way to know if we're doing our job is for you to let them know. And so we really appreciate it if you take the 2 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe 2 minutes to fill that link out. If anyone else has any other questions right now, feel free to unmute yourself, ask away, or type in the chat box. If not, hopefully this was something you enjoyed and found beneficial. Whether you decide to grow grapes or not, maybe you learned a little more. But I'll be quiet now. If anyone has any questions, go ahead. Okay. I don't think we do. All right, Jacqueline, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Michael. As Michael has stated, I did place the program survey in the chat. As he stated, we are state funded, and this is the best way for us to report that we are doing our job and bringing you the information that you are seeking on things. So if you take a few minutes to fill that out for us, we greatly appreciate it. So Michael, I can't thank you enough for agreeing to present on this program today. As always, every time I listen to you, I learn something new, and I think I'm going to get me a grapevine or two and plant at home.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. It sounds good. Well, thank you for having me, Jacqueline. I really appreciate it. So
wonderful. So with that being said, everyone, as a reminder, this program was recorded. Please give me until a little bit till into next week. That way I can edit this video a little bit, and I will get it posted to the Tarrant AgriLife YouTube page, and then I will send y'all the link for that, so y'all can go back to refresh for any information or to share this information with someone who would be interested in it. As always, if you have any questions or any concerns with anything, please feel free to reach out to Michael or myself. We're more than happy to help in any way possible. So with that being said, today we will go ahead and conclude the program, and everybody have a very wonderful weekend.
Great. Thanks. See y'all later.